That kid is, here's how we start this. Central casting, send me an architect. That's me. In 1950, let's call it 4, which would make it 70 years ago. And we lived in, that house right there. And we'll see it in the site plan in a few minutes. And as was said earlier, we moved out of there when I was about 7 or 8. And it's been my regret ever since. But I do think it's why I'm an architect today, that we living in that house for that period of 6 or 7 years at a really formative age. And doing this whole symposium and getting all the boundaries of Goodman's, I knew a lot about Goodman. I didn't know this much about Goodman. Has been really a fleshing out of a lot of this experience. So this, again, this was our house here. And you can see the neighbor house here, our house, this house here. This house here, I'll talk a little more about the personalities. That belonged to Lane Kirkland, who, if you know labor history, was the president of the AFL-CIO for a long time and was like a major figure. My father worked for the FBI. And it was an interesting group of people who lived there. And I'll get back to a little bit of that in a minute. That's my house. Julia took these pictures. My house now, there's been some modifications to the windows here, but otherwise it's the same. And here you see it from the street, and I'll talk about the route in a minute too. So this is the subdivision. We were at 3415, which is right there. The Kirklands lived right there. David Condon, you heard about Francis Lethbridge earlier, the architect who worked with Satterley and Lethbridge and Smith. It was like a little incestuous thing. All these people worked with each other. These groups reformed. Lethbridge was partnered with David Condon, who you heard about earlier, who did those exquisite drawings that Greg showed. They became Keyes, Lethbridge, and Condon, which is a juggernaut of a firm to this day in Washington, now known as the Smith Group, because they merged with a large Detroit, I think, firm. But really probably the most important Washington firm post-war to now. And an awful lot of people like Hartman Cox and so forth who came later worked there. So Condon was down here. I'm not quite sure where. So I'm just going to do, this is a brief thing that I'm going to do, and I said to myself, what would I do as an architect if I was going to go and work on a house in Hammond Woods, which is the place I know best? I would invent a set of, I would find the rules that were used in making these buildings, the compositional rules, and I would understand those rules, and I would not break them. So this is a pamphlet. That I made on my iPad. It's called "Be a Goodman" or "Be a Good Man." So that's our house, and this is the Kirkland house next door. And this first slide is talking about site planning, and I call the site planning dice thrown. We have objects thrown on the landscape. They are not parallel. They're not perpendicular. They're not in alignment. They have odd, idiosyncratic geometrical relationships to one another, partly related to topography, but also partly related to the ensemble of any group of houses. And the other thing is no driveways. In Hammond Wood, there are no driveways, no stinking carports. When my clients ask for carports, I of course say yes. But and this is again my house. The chimney is on the back, but I refer to these chimneys as sentinels. You follow your way around the house, one way or another, get to the chimney, you're at the door. And Greg talked about the paving outside, integrating into the chimney on the inside. It's one big masonry ensemble. And in this case, you walk around behind the house. There's none of this front door stuff. So dice thrown, sentinel chimney, walkabout, and no driveways. The window walls, you can't emphasize, and almost the rest of my talk is about window walls, enough the importance of the window walls. Not just that they were windows, but they were detailed perfectly. And to me, perfect detailing is the only detailing to do. So when we talk about Eichler or some of the West Coast people, not the case study people, but Cliff May with the ranch houses, and then you talk about Goodman, we're not in the same league there. That there's a whole elevation of quality in Charles Goodman above those other buildings, and they're fine, but this is really fine. So the window walls are really important. And notice that, sorry, let me go backwards here. Notice that the Kirkland's windows here and our windows were perpendicular to each other. And so it was as if the two houses were designed together. There was no way to look from their windows into our windows. And we had an interesting relationship with the Kirklands. They had 3 daughters, more or less the age of my sister and brother and I, and they led us down wayward paths when we were 5 or 6. Anyway, it was an interesting, and so I know about this because I lived here. I don't really recall what happened in this direction or in that direction, but if you start to look at that and say that's really one building, right? They've been designed together. You can't separate them. You can't do them any other way. And if you start to think about site planning being done that way, it's just one continuous fabric of houses that are inevitably placed, then you realize that Goodman's onto a whole other thing. He's a really good architect, really making good buildings, but very few architects get to site plan an ensemble like this and to design the houses accordingly. Very few, by very few I mean none. So that's the reality of it. Simple roofs. You've seen in the last day. You've seen these roofs: shallow pitch, butterfly, flat, and single pitch. You haven't seen single pitch, but you will. There is never an L-shaped Goodman house because it would complicate the roof. And so, these are essentially what I would call pavilions. They're just simple shapes with a very simple roof. The detailing, I don't expect any of you to read this because I certainly can't, but it was all about wood frame construction, but really going around the building to corner, to window, to door, to everything, and hitting every possible intersection all the way around the building, which is an amazing level of detail. But I'll call your attention to that detail right there, which is the Goodman window, which is sacred. And that's a detail. People have shown the images of this. In this case, a 2x6. It's been datoed. The glass goes in, and you put the stops on the outside. The reason that is so important is that the shape of the mullion is a very, very simple rectangular shape. And if you take, as all builders do now, and put 2 windows together, or maybe have some structure in between them, you have no perfection. You have no really defined kind of shape. Our office, I've worked on a couple of good buildings over the years. We restored one in Chevy Chase 20 years ago. And we started with that window detail. We will not vary that window detail. We will put insulated glass in it, but we're not going to the window store to get windows. We're going to make them as they did here. So this is Gladys. This is Gladys. I don't know Gladys, but a very important part of the community, and Julia can identify her, sitting in the window frame, and it's holding up the roof. It's not windows right now. It's holding up the roof because that's the framing of the wall. So we have a window wall that's holding up the roof, and how many times in the history of architecture has that been done? Let's say none. None. So it's the integration of this kind of wooden wall with the windows in it that is really kind of amazing. I have stolen this detail a couple times. This is one of our projects. There's a house that actually coincidentally exists between two Goodman houses in Chevy Chase. And one of them is the Jacobs house that Greg showed a rendering of by Dave Condon. This all connects stuff. But the detailing here is, that's what a window frame looks like. It could not be any simpler in shape. And when Mies van der Rohe, he not only said less is more, which was right, but he said God is in the details, which was also right. And so you can't change this window in a Goodman house. I think this is my last slide. I came across this in sort of working on this and stuff. We deeply need more offbeat personalities, more people with unique interests, more people strong enough to stand unafraid and be themselves. We need them not just in our houses, but in communities where our influence can be felt. We need unity and diverse interests. People of every age must be part of the vital community. We understand that now politically and socially, but he said it 70 years ago. Thank you.